Welcome everyone and happy Earth Day. Welcome to Making Herbal Teas and Infusions from Pollinator Plants with Stephen Reid. We are so thrilled to have everyone here for Earth Week with GreenThumb. My name is Mara Gittleman. I am the Workshops and Education Coordinator for NYC Parks GreenThumb. We are the office of the New York City Parks Department that works with community gardens across the city. And this week for Earth Week, we have a series of webinars uplifting the ecological benefits of native plants and pollinators in community gardens. We will be recording today's webinar and making it available on our website and YouTube channel. I will put links in the chat so you can check out our past webinars as well. And we'll have the recording focused on the facilitator, but you're welcome to decide whether or not your camera is on by using the little camcorder icon at the bottom of your screen. Please use the chat for all questions you have throughout the webinar. I will be holding on to them and I will read them out loud when it's time for Q&A. And if you have any technical difficulties as well, you can message me directly in the chat. So thank you everyone again for being here today. And without further ado, I pass the mic to Stephen.
Cool. Thank you guys. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you everybody for tuning in. For everybody else that's just trickling in now, welcome. Cool. So yeah, thank you guys. Welcome to Making Infusions and Teas with Pollinator Plants. Once again, my name is Stephen Reid. I'm an herbalist, obviously. I also am a DJ and a gardener. So I actually just received my herbal certificate from Flower Power. I don't know if any of you have been to Flower Power. It's in the Lower East Side for those of you who are in New York. Some of you might have visited. It's been around for almost 30 years, I think 26, 27 years. So it's a staple in the East Village in New York if any of you have ever visited. And if you haven't, I would definitely recommend you visiting. Excuse me, I have some notes on my phone, so I'm just going to be kind of referencing my phone as we're going through this presentation. But yeah, so I'm an herbalist. I received my herbal certificate recently from Flower Power. I'm also a gardener. I am a part of the Brooklyn Botanical Garden and a member of the Brooklyn Urban Gardeners class of 2018. So we really took a good look at urban gardens and communities. And actually through the book Brooklyn Urban Gardeners is how I actually got into herbalism. So if you're ever interested in any type of gardening program, it's a really good program based out of the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. Yeah, so, and I'm also the owner of Medicine Man, which is an herbal therapeutic brand that I'm launching in a few days, actually. Right now we sell herbal smoke blends, we'll be selling medicinal tinctures, and we also sell sea moss gels as well. And that'll be the website and the email address and everything for that will be at the end of the presentation. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna share my screen. I have a little presentation that I made for you guys so you can kind of reference a few things that I'm talking about and see a few things that I'm talking about. If you have any pens or any paper or anything to take notes, it might be helpful. But I will share, if you RSVP'd and you left your email, we will be sharing a reference sheet after this presentation where you can find any resources, any helpful information, and a few further in depth on some of the things that I'm talking of today. Yeah, so give me 1 second. I'm going to share my screen, make sure everybody can see it. All right, here we go. Everybody can see it. If you can't see it, just let us know, but you should see Making Herbal Teas and Infusions with Pollinator Plants. So one of my ethos for herbs, and ever since I've been working with herbs and plants, is that it really is the people's medicine. I think it's the people's medicine because one thing if you're planting your own seeds, it's really inexpensive or almost free if you know how to forage to find medicines that are located around you, that are located next to you, that you can plant yourself and grow yourself. Right now, I think it's really important that we have medicines that work for us and medicines that we don't have to pay too much for, because the way that the pharmaceutical system is set up in America right now, everybody may not be covered or may not be able to afford healthcare. So I think herbs can be either an intermediary or an alternative that you can use that is a lot less expensive, and it provides good results and consistent results throughout history. So I truly believe herbs are the people's medicines because it really is about the people and about us finding ways to heal ourselves and use natural remedies to heal ourselves. Um, and so we'll go to the next slide. Cool. So this is a little bit about what we're going to be doing today. First, we're going to be looking at a brief intro into medicinal herbs and why you should be drinking them. We're also going to be looking at a few water-based preparations. So water-based preparations, there's a lot of different ways that you can work with herbs. You can use oils, you can use vinegars, you can use like beeswax or fats. All of these things can extract medicinal properties out of herbs. Today, we're going to be talking about water-based extractions, which includes teas, infusions, and probably the lesser known decoctions. So we'll be going over all three of those: teas, infusions, decoctions, and the best ways to prepare those, the best herbs to use for those, materials that you would need to prepare those, and a little bit more information and how to make them with the best results. We'll also be taking a look at 5 pollinator-friendly herbs that you can grow at home. Actually, the herbs that I included in the presentation, I used images from things that I've either grown or wildcrafted myself, um, because I think it's a lot easier to talk about them when you have experience. I have knowledge of a good wide range of herbs, but it's so much more helpful when you can actually grow them yourself from seed, feel them, and use them and dry them in your own medicines. I feel that it's a lot more the medicine I feel is a lot more beneficial when you're actually able to use it and forage it yourself versus even buying it dry or buying the medicines already made or the teas and the infusions already made. So we will be talking about 5 pollinator-friendly herbs that you can grow at home, but you can also find these in your local herb shop, like Flower Power, or online, like a Mountain Rose Herbs. And again, I'll give you these resources in our PDF in the next day or so. Also, we'll be looking at incorporating teas and infusions into your lifestyle. So you would think of teas, infusions, decoctions as things that you would typically drink and take internally and help with any internal issues or sometimes external issues if it's dealing with the liver and the skin. But you can actually use teas, infusions, and decoctions as bases or by themselves for a range of different things. And we'll, other than drinking and enjoying for tea. So we'll take a look at a few of those things that you can use infusions and decoctions for. And then if you guys have any questions, if you have anything that's on your mind or anything you'd like to share, we'll have a brief Q&A after the end of the presentation. And I'll answer those questions to the best of my ability. But I am very good at saying I don't know because I think that's a really powerful answer. I don't know everything. And I don't think any one herbalist knows everything. And that's why it's such a powerful community, because we each have something that we don't know, and then sharing allows us to find those things out. So if I don't know something and somebody else maybe that's watching knows, feel free to send an answer in the chat and we can all figure it out together. All right. All right, so let's get on to the next slide. If you guys have any questions so far, let me know and we'll start. So, all right, so what we're doing today. So the first thing that we're going to look at is teas. Does anybody have any experience with anything before we get started as far as teas, infusions, decoctions, any experience with herbs in general? Any experience with even outside of teas and infusions? Maybe you make medicine, maybe you just like drinking green tea in the morning. Anybody? You can drop it in the chat if you do. Okay. No experience with decoctions. Lynette, you've had dried mint before. Okay. Dried mint is really good. Red bush tea, cool. Sun tea, medicinal trees, dried herbs, excellent. Nettle tea and tulsi from Marie. We'll be talking about tulsi today, so that's perfect. Jessica said she grew chamomile for the first time this year. That's really cool. I tried to grow chamomile, but I just didn't have enough sun. So that's really good that you had enough sun to grow chamomile. It's a beautiful flower. And Ali said she's a big tea drinker, and uses herbs for medicine sometimes. So that's cool. We have a pretty good, a solid base. A lot of people understand and have used herbs, and some people haven't used them. Oops, I'm going a little ahead of myself. Sorry. Some people haven't used them in a medicinal way, but I'm sure all of us in this group have used herbs in one way or another, even if we haven't realized it. Even a lot of the medicines that we use in pharmaceuticals are extracted from herbs, from constituents in herbs. So you may have been taking a property of an herb, even if you haven't taken an herb in the whole form. Sometimes we find different herbs in capsules. So you may have been taking herbal capsules without knowing that it was an herb that you're taking. And we all eat and we all season our food, hopefully. So you've likely also used herbs in your food when you're seasoning. If you've used thyme, if you've used rosemary, if you've used allspice, all of these are aromatic and medicinal herbs that have been used for culinary uses, but also have very, very powerful medicinal actions. Um, so yeah, so starting with teas, and since we do have a few of us have a good understanding of herbs and what they've been used for. Teas are probably, I would say, in my experience, they're the most most popular and most familiar to people that haven't done um, too much of a deep dive into teas. Um, Most of you have probably had Lipton tea or Lipton iced tea, black tea, green tea. Chai tea is another popular one. And these usually come in little tea bags that you can put in to a cup like this one and steep for about 15 or 20 minutes and have a really good cup of tea. Um, there are a lot of differences, however, between teas, infusions, and decoctions. So teas, I personally look at as more of a beverage. I don't see teas necessarily as being very medicinal, for the reason being they're not steeped long enough. For a lot of herbs, you want to steep them for at least 4 to 8 hours or overnight, which may come to a surprise as a lot of people. When most people think of teas, they're thinking of, like I mentioned earlier, a tea bag with a 15-minute steep, and they drink it in the morning, and it might be just an alternative to coffee. Most people aren't really using teas for medicine or using herbs for medicine. They're just kind of using it as a delicacy, which it's perfectly fine. Like I love green tea, I love Lipton iced tea. I was raised in the South, so I've had my fair share of iced tea. Probably too much iced tea, but I've had a good amount of iced tea. So I grew up with teas, but we just never used them medicinally. So you can definitely start using these teas medicinally, and it adds a new dimension to your healthcare and to your self-care routines because of how potent these teas are, especially if they're taken consistently. The good thing about teas is that they can be enjoyed throughout the day. So since they're not super potent, they're not going to have a huge medicinal effect on your body. So if you're craving something and you want to just have a refreshing beverage and you don't really want to wait for 4 hours or 8 hours, I think teas are the best way to go. I wouldn't use them in cases of extreme, like if you're having extreme stomach pain, or if you're having a lot of body pain, or if you have any like extreme or long-standing conditions, even if it's like eczema or ulcers or anything in circulation issues or high blood pressure. I would use infusions versus teas, but teas can also just be used as a general tonic throughout the day. Like a cup of green tea, even if you steep it for 15 or 20 minutes, is going to have a decent amount of caffeine and still give you a little kick if you're a little bit more sensitive to caffeine. Um, and also on that note, there are certain plants and flowers that don't need as long as a steep time to be medicinal. A few of those might be something like somebody mentioned they grew chamomile. Chamomile is one of the flowers that you only need to steep for maybe about 5 or 10 minutes, and that's a full medicinal dose when you steep chamomile for 5 or 10 minutes. Because the volatile oils, the things that make chamomile smell really, really delicious and sweet, those oils they extract pretty quickly in water and extract pretty strongly in water. So you don't need to have that steeping for more than 10 minutes or else it'll get really bitter. I don't know if anybody has had any experience with steeping chamomile for maybe more than 20 minutes or even like accidentally leaving a chamomile tea bag steeping for maybe an hour or so. But typically, if it's good chamomile, it'll get really, really bitter. And although it may be somewhat potent, it's not going to be very enjoyable to drink. So I would say things like chamomile, things like the jasmine flower, those plants and herbs only really need to be steeped for 15 minutes max, or else they get bitter. And that goes just along with knowing what herb you're using and understanding the constituents of the herb you're using, and maybe even the texture and how tough it is. And that comes with a little bit more experience, and as you start working with a lot more different plants. But for all intents and purposes, teas are about 5 to 20 minutes of a steeping time. Not super medicinal, but you can drink them throughout the day without having too many issues, and they can be used for light medicinal woes, like maybe you're having light stomach cramping or nausea. You don't really need to steep ginger for 12 hours, right? You can do like a 30-minute ginger tea or decoction, and drink that down, and that would be fine. So yeah, it all depends on the herb and what you're using and how you're using it for. All right, let me get to our next section. Any questions on teas? All right. And one thing I want to mention about teas too is that um, it's you can for teas you also aren't using as much herb as you would be using for a decoction or for an infusion. For tea, you probably only want to use about 1 teaspoon per cup. You don't need it any more, any less than that. I think if you're using more than that, you're just going to be wasting herb. It can get, depending on the plant, it could get a little bit more flavorful if you add more or less. So that can be to taste, but typically you only really need a teaspoon to a tablespoon per cup for any type of tea that you're making with a 15-minute steep. And before we go a little bit further, some people may not even realize just like the basic way to make a tea if you're used to buying teas out of a tea bag. So obviously, if you're buying it in a tea bag, you have your tea bag and you let it steep in your cup for about 10-15 minutes and then remove it. Or I like keeping the tea bag in the cup of tea and then drinking it as it goes down. And I think it's perfect like that. But a lot of times you'll find that you don't have the teas don't come in the tea bags already prepackaged. You would buy them loose, like loose herbs. And those are my preferred way of buying herbs. With loose herbs, you can still use like a muslin bag and tie it up and drop it into your pot or into your cup. But however, the way I like to make teas, I should say the way I like to make infusions, which we'll get into a little bit later, but you can also make teas this way too, is using a mason jar full of the herb. So this is a 4-cup mason jar, which you can get at most hardware stores, some corner stores, but you can find these readily available in most areas. This is a 4-cup one. You can also get the 8-cup ones, and you can get a smaller size, which is a 2-cup one. My favorite is the 4-cup one because it allows perfect size. And this would be the jar for an infusion, the amount for infusion, which we'll go over later. If you guys can see this, this is a tea that I'm drinking on today, actually, which is oat seed, oat straw, nettles, and horsetail for skin, hair, and adrenal health. But I would use this amount for an infusion because I'm going to make a stronger dose. But typically for a tea, you can even eyeball it, and you'd want to use maybe a quarter of that, and even in a smaller jar if you wanted to, and then top it with boiling water and let it sit for 15 or 20 minutes. And then after that, you can strain it out and you'll have a really good cup of tea. And yeah, another benefit to teas, and this might be a pretty common theme that you'll see throughout this presentation, is that they're delicious. So I have whether an herb is delicious or not on each slide, and we'll see which ones are delicious. And I think all of them are. So yeah. All right, so that's teas. Yeah. Any other questions on teas? And we'll move on to infusions. All right. All right, so infusions. Infusions are my favorite kind of water-based preparations. I typically drink an infusion, at least 2 to 3 cups of an infusion per day. And then the infusion that I drink really all depends on what health goals I'm trying to accomplish, what health ailments I'm trying to resolve, or if I feel that my intake of water or or anything like that is a little bit low, I may drink a little bit more infusions to help balance that out a little bit. So I do enjoy infusions. I'm usually drinking about 2 to 3 cups per day. I usually go through like the size that's a size up from this, the half-gallon 8 cup size of an infusion I'll make overnight, and then I'll usually go through that in about 3 to 4 days for an infusion, about 2 to 3 cups a day. I think infusions are perfect for all types, all parts of the plant. One thing we didn't talk about in the last slide about teas is that it does work well for flowers like a delicate chamomile flower or a delicate jasmine flower, since you're not steeping these herbs for very long with the tea. With infusions, it works well for some flowers, but like I mentioned, flowers like chamomile can get bitter, but it works really well with leaves and also seeds and roots and barks. It's not the best for barks, seeds, and roots because those are a lot harder and harder than flowers and leaves, and harder to get the medicinal qualities, extract the medicinal qualities via hot water. So that's going to be more used for the decoction, which we'll talk about next. But infusions are excellent for leaves, flowers, some soft roots like burdock root or dandelion root, because those things are very tough and fibrous, and they can release their water. They can release their medicinal qualities over time. So those things you can let steep for anywhere from 4 to 24 hours. As you get closer to the 24-hour period of steeping, that will definitely be on the end of mushrooms like medicinal mushrooms, reishi, chaga. Those are herbs that you can steep for a very long time. You can use them in bone broths, you can use them in stews, and you can reuse them even after you steep them because they're so tough to get all of the qualities out of. But those qualities are really, really potent for medicinal mushrooms. But for infusions, typically the most you'll want to steep something is 8 hours. What I usually do is make an infusion before I go to sleep at night. And then when I wake up in the morning, I'll start drinking it down from that day. And that's usually gives me the strongest dose. I don't have to really wait kind of during the day in anticipation. I could sleep and wake up and my infusion is there. So as I mentioned before, infusions are also stronger in medicinal action. They're stronger in medicinal action simply because you're getting more of the constituents of the herb out of the water versus a 10 to 15-minute steep of tea. Again, take that with a grain of salt because there are some options like chamomile, jasmine that are flowers that you don't want to steep for too long. But for the most part, most of your infusions are going to have a stronger medicinal action than your teas because of the length of time that they're steeped and also the amount of herb that's being used in those infusions. You're using so much more of the herb when you're making an infusion than when you're making a tea or even a decoction. Um, I guess kind of the downside in my own personal experience with using infusions is that and I say this, they can get expensive, but expensive comparatively to other herbal medications. And I say expensive, I probably spend $30 to $45 a month on on things to make herbal infusions and tea blends, and that takes care of probably like 70, 80, 90% of most of my health woes compared to maybe having to go to a doctor, to a clinic, and paying $50 out of pocket copay, then plus the medication, so on and so forth. Just one visit of a doctor is already priced more than maybe a month's worth of an herbal infusion. So expensive in context of herbal medicine, but really inexpensive in context of medicine in general. So that's one of my favorite things. One of the downsides, but also kind of within context that makes sense. Also, I use infusions to help with a wide range of ailments or health goals, like I mentioned earlier. I use, for example, this infusion I'm drinking today. I just haven't added the water into this one. Is oat seed, oat straw, nettles, and horsetail. Uh, for me, what I was looking for was skin health, hair health, and also mental health. And this blend gives all three of those things. Skin health with the nettles, which I think somebody mentioned earlier, they drink a lot of nettles. I would assume you probably have really good hair, really good skin, or that's something that you're working on. Because that's one of the more popular benefits of drinking nettles is the amount of nutrients and minerals that are included. Um, and also horsetail is really good for hair. It has a lot of silica in it, and silica is really helpful for the building blocks for your joints and your connective tissues. and also for your hair, skin, and nails. And then combining that with the oat seed and the oat straw, those are two of the more prominent herbs that you can use for your nervous system, for nourishing and caring for your nervous system. So all of these blended together make kind of like a super tea that I can drink for 3 or 4 different ailments. Whereas maybe I would have to take a pill for this and then go to the dermatologist for this and then get a shot for that. I can really just get all of this in one infusion, drinking 2 to 3 cups a day over the course of a month and have really good effects. So I think that's one of the benefits of infusions is that they can cater to a wide range of ailments or health goals, or you can narrow it down to 1 or 2 things that you're working on. Maybe you are having you have stomach ulcers or stomach inflammation, and you're just only drinking marshmallow root, right? Because you want to help calm that inflammation and soothe the stomach instead. But you can also mix it with slippery elm or calendula, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So it just really gives a lot of options when you use infusions, which could get overwhelming, but it's always good to keep it simple. One of the measurements I use for infusions, I typically use 1 cup of herb per 4 cups of per 4 cups of water. So this is a 4 cup jar. I used about 1 cup. One of the things I'm learning and learning as I go along in herbalism is eyeballing things. They call it the wise woman method in herbalism, where it's you don't really have like, oh, 2 quarts of this or 1 cup of this. It's really just eyeballing it, seeing how much you know based off of memory and experience, and then making the best medicine with the best intent possible. The wise woman method is extremely powerful, extremely popular, and is ingrained in so many different communities. Grandmothers used to use it. Probably, I know my grandmother was a wise woman. My mom is a wise woman. So many of our community herbalists and elders have been wise women that have found these medicines in their front yards and made beautiful medicines with them and have healed their own communities, their own families, and their own people. So I'd say a cup of dried herb per 4 cups of water is a good measurement. If you're using a bigger 8 cup mason jar, you may want to use a little bit more, but you can always eyeball it. The rule that I'm learning with herbalism as well is that there is no rules. There are a few rules, like you don't want to take something you're not familiar with, but when it comes to creating and being creative and crafting your own medicines, there really are no rules. Just because somebody did something and says it worked and it doesn't work for you, maybe something else might work for you. But it's really good.
Someone's got a quick question for
Yeah.
clarification. Are you talking about 1 cup of herbs hacked or like loose?
Oh, I'm sorry. That's 1 cup of herbs loose. So these are like loose herbs. They don't come in the you can buy this in the herb shop. They don't come in like the package. You would want to use 1 cup of loose herbs.
You wouldn't like smush it into your measuring cup though, right? Sometimes things call for like a packed cup of basil or like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, you can. It's not that goes hand in hand with what I was just mentioning as far as there are no rules. So I say 1 cup, and I think a lot of people sometimes get caught up on, oh, well, it has to be a cup. But if you accidentally do a cup and a half, or if you accidentally do like 3/4 of a cup, it's not a specific science. You know what I mean? So if you want, you can try making it both ways, right? Like maybe pack your herbs into the cup and make it that way, and then just do it loosely the next time and see the differences. Listen to your body, see how your body reacts with a little bit of a stronger packed in dose or a little bit of a less one, and you may find that you like the packed in one a little bit better, right? Or you may find that you like the less packed version that has a little bit less herbs in it. So yeah, there's not really like a rule or like a rule. There are rules of thumb, if that makes sense, but there's not really a solid rule for making these things. It's really going to be on your preference, your taste, and honestly, the most from what I've seen in my experience, the issue with people using herbs isn't necessarily not using too much. It's usually not using enough of the herb. A lot of times you have to use a lot. Like I'm sure a lot of people wouldn't think that you'd want to use a cup of dried herbs per 4 cups of water. That may seem like a lot to some people, but that's probably could even for some people be a very low amount for an infusion using that 1 cup dosage. So find your own kind of measurement. I still use a cup measurement for mine, but I don't even like, I just kind of like dip it in and pour it in. It's not even like an exact science. So yeah, don't stress too much about being very exact. You can just use the wise woman method and kind of go with your intuition and see how you feel. And then select that option based on what your own personal experience. Cool. All right. And yeah, so like I mentioned before, it's delicious. So yeah, that's also included. That's one of my favorite reasons to use decoctions, because they're delicious. Um, yeah, so that's infusion. So let's move on to the decoctions. I'm just going to check the time, 4:31. Okay, perfect. All right, decoctions. So decoctions, like I mentioned earlier, decoctions. You know what? I'm sorry. Let's go back one slide. I didn't even mention to you guys how to make the infusion. I just said it was 4 cups, 1 cup of dried root. So you add the dried herbs into the, or fresh herbs you can use, 1 cup into the jar. Um, what you want to do after that is make sure you have boiling water. I use a hot water heater to boil my water, but you can also boil water on a pot, boil water on the stove, and then you want to pour the boiling water, 4 cups. The mason jars are pre-measured. They have pre-measured lines, so you can just follow these lines as you're pouring in your water. You want to pour in the water till it gets to about 4 cups. I sometimes pour it to the top, um, and then cover it to make sure that all of your oil, your volatile oils, that they don't escape and they stay within the medicine. So you want to make sure it's covered. All right. And then after it's covered, what I like to do is, because sometimes the herbs will float to the top and the ones on the very top don't actually get soaked in the tea if you just leave it sitting there. So after it fills up, I like to, and you might want to use like a cloth because it gets really hot on the glass. Just flip it upside down, flip it back really quick, just to make sure all of the herbs get soaked. You can do it a couple of times, infuse your own energy into it, make it as magical as you want, and then set it aside. Um, Sometimes I'll leave it outside of the fridge overnight in order for it to stay as hot as possible for the longest period of time. Sometimes I'll just immediately put it in the fridge. Usually in the summertime, I'll immediately put it in the fridge because I want a cold drink in the morning. In the wintertime, most of the time I'll leave it outside of the fridge, so it's still a little bit warm when I take it out of the when I'm ready to drink it in the morning. But that's my personal preference. You can find what works best for you, and depending on the herb that you're working with. One thing I think is really cool for infusions, mainly in some teas, but mainly infusions, is that there's also something called a cold infusion. Now, a cold infusion is doing the exact same thing as you would with hot water, but except using it with cold water, or preferably room temperature water. With cold infusions, the benefit is that with hot infusions, they extract a lot of the constituents that are medicinal, as far as volatile oils, minerals, so on and so forth. With cold infusions, they work best with herbs that are mucilaginous. Mucilaginous meaning when they interact with water or anything liquid based, they get really gooey and thick. One of the more popular mucilaginous herbs are marshmallow root, which some of you may be familiar with or may have used. Marshmallow root is helpful for lung issues, lung dryness. It's a really good lung tonic, and it's also really good for your gut, for helping to reduce ulcers, helping to reduce gastric gastric ulcers, duodenal ulcers, also acid reflux, any type of irritation in the esophagus. But to make a marshmallow root infusion, in order to extract that mucilaginous quality, what you want to do is use room temperature water and let it sit for around 5 to 7 hours instead of using hot water. And what you do is mix that let that room temperature water with the marshmallow root sit for about 7 hours, and then drink it down the next day. However, be cautious that when you do drink it down, it's going to be very, very thick. So when you drink it down, it might not be the most texture-wise, be the best, but I promise you, your stomach's going to feel so much better. Your lungs are going to feel so much better. You're going to be soothed, and it's just a great tonic for your lungs. But that's an example of what you would use for a cold infusion. Herbs like marshmallow root, slippery elm, even calendula, again, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, can be used as a cold infusion because of that mucilaginous quality. Some seaweeds too are really good for cold infusions because of that mucilaginous quality. All right, and then we'll also talk about decoctions. There we go. So decoctions are probably the lesser known type of water-based extraction that we use in herbalism, but just as important and just as beneficial for the body. Decoctions are excellent for your roots, your barks, and your seeds. Those are the things that have a really hard outer shell. It's going to be a lot harder to get the qualities of the herbs out of just by doing a simple water extraction. What I do to make what I do to make a decoction is that I have a pot, like a regular, like a aluminum or metal pot, fill it with water and bring it to a boil. After the water is boiling, then I add however much of the herb into the boiling water and bring it down to a simmer. So I let the water boil, add the herb, bring it down to a simmer, and then I'll cover it and let it sit for about 45 minutes to an hour. Typically, you can do a little bit more, you can do a little bit less, but typically I'll do about 45 minutes to an hour of simmering time for roots, barks, and seeds, and that's called a decoction. Now, decoction, what will happen is your water will start evaporating off and you'll be left with a lot less of the medicine than you started with, which is good because that means now your medicine is concentrated, albeit in a lower amount, but it's a lot more concentrated. So you can always go about the business of adding more water and boiling it back down, adding more water, boiling it back down, making sure that you're keeping it covered as you're simmering it down so the medicine doesn't escape in the vapor and stays inside the pot as many times as you need. I typically like just doing it for about 45 minutes to an hour and maybe simmering it down by about a third, depending on the what I'm trying to accomplish with the herb. Um, it's really cool because these decoctions also form the base of a lot of syrups. Most popular one, which a lot of you might be familiar with, is elderberry syrup. So elderberry syrup is essentially first it's a decoction. They decoct the elderberries, which makes that beautiful purple and delicious, funky smelling kind of elderberry traditional smell. And then after it's been decocted and halved or however many times they have it, they just add either maple syrup, add honey, you can add some alcohol for to preserve it, and then you have your syrup. And you can do syrups with so many different berries: hawthorn berry, elderberry. You can use bilberry. There's so many different berries and things that you can make syrups out of. So you making a decoction is always the first step before making a syrup, which is really cool. Also, syrups can have strong medicinal actions. So sometimes when you're decocting something like a sassafras bark, for example, you may not want to use as much as of it as you would if you were drinking an infusion. So you may not want to do the 2-3 cups a day of a decoction because the medicine is going to be a little bit stronger. So maybe for a decoction um, of sarsaparilla or anything like that, you probably want to use maybe 1 cup a day or like half a cup 3 times a day. So you want to make sure you're lowering your amount and starting low because they can be a little bit more potent and can cause different effects in the body that you may not be prepared for if you're drinking it in mass. Maybe it's like diarrhea, or maybe you're sweating a lot, or maybe you're just like your circulation, you have too much energy. So you want to start with decoctions, very, very low dose, and then build up from there as you see what effect it has on your body. All right. And also, finally, I love decoctions because they are delicious. Yeah. All right. So let's get into the pollinator-friendly herbs that we're going to be talking about today. And it's 140, so I'm going to be going through these. I'm sorry, it's 440 where you guys are. I'm going to be going through this a little bit quickly, but again, we'll have some resources at the end, and we will send those out to you guys if you have any further questions. And this does say 6 pollinator herbs. I just want to let you know that it's actually 5. And I didn't include lavender and rosemary, but I did include basil and as well as holy basil. So there's basil, holy basil, calendula, sage, and goldenrod. I wanted to include lavender and rosemary as kind of like shout outs because although I didn't grow those, I grew them, but I didn't grow them successfully because I only had about 4 to 6 hours of sun where I was gardening. So I wasn't able to really take advantage of lavender or rosemary, which really needs full sun in order to really get going, but I included them just kind of as a special mention. All right. So the first one we're going to talk about is holy basil, which is also called Ocimum teniflorum. As somebody mentioned earlier in the chat, they know it as Tulsi, but holy basil and Tulsi are essentially the same thing. So the Hindus actually regarded this plant as early manifestations of the goddess Tulsi, and every single part of the plant was considered sacred. This was probably my most grown plant over summer of 2020. It just grew so abundantly, so easily. I think there was sometimes when I was starting the seeds, I dropped a few by accident into a pot without even watering them, giving them light. And within a couple of weeks, the actual seeds started sprouting without me. I didn't even know that they were there, but they started sprouting. So this seed really wants to grow, really wants to reach towards the sun and attract its own pollinators. The picture that you see to the right is my own holy basil that I grew over the summer. You can kind of see that beautiful flower kind of sticking out the top of it, which was constantly attracting honeybees. I didn't really see many butterflies, but I definitely saw a lot of honeybees and hoverflies that came to enjoy the pollen from the holy basil. What we'll be talking about for each different herbs, a few different things. Um, One of them is actions of the herb. Actions are things like antiviral, antifungal, immunomodulating. And as we go through these different actions, I'll be sure to explain them so you guys understand what those actions are. So, holy basil is immunomodulating, which I thought was really cool and probably a word that a lot of people aren't familiar with. Some herbs are immune boosting, where they kind of stimulate the immune system to fight off any defenses. And some, like holy basil, are immunomodulating. So instead of actually just boosting your immune system, where in cases of um, autoimmune disorders or autoimmune diseases, boosting the immune system may not be the most beneficial. Immunomodulating essentially regulates your immune system. So if your immune system doesn't need to be as active in some times or in some areas, it'll actually downregulate it. If it is weak in some areas, holy basil and the constituents can actually upregulate it. So they call that immunomodulating, which is a really, really powerful effect, usually common for most medicinal mushrooms. So like your reishi or your shiitake, but holy basil is one of the few plants that also is immunomodulating, as well as self-heal and astragalus are the other few ones that are also immunomodulating. And also, holy basil is antiviral. So it was actually one of the plants that was used for flu pandemics over history. So, flu epidemics over history was considered a preventative herb. So this is a really good herb that you should grow or have dried in your cabinet for all seasons in order to make sure your immune system is strong and vibrating, and that you have sufficient adrenals. It's really good at supporting your adrenals. Really excellent at your boosting your energy levels. And yeah, it's a delicious purple flower that attracts honeybees. I was drinking before this infusion I'm drinking now. My previous infusion was with holy basil and oat seed and nettle, so similar, but just with the addition of holy basil, because I really wanted that adrenal boosting, energy level modulating, and also calming effect of holy basil. Um, it is in the mint family. So as a lot of you maybe, I think somebody mentioned they have used mint. Mint is really common for any stomach ailment. So if you have upset stomach, if you are having gas or any type of discomfort after you eat, using a mint or even using holy basil as a holy basil tea can help with that digestion. Um, in my own personal use, I find that it both calms and energizes. So at times when I need to relax, I find that it helps me relax and calm down, maybe closer to the end of the day. But it's such an invigorating plant that you can drink in the morning time as well, that it can keep you active and up all day. And it is also delicious as well. All right, so that's holy basil, also known as Ocimum teniflorium, and it also that is a synonym for its genus and species name, Ocimum teniflorium, but it also is known as Ocimum sanctum, which you kind of think of sanctum, you think of sanctuary, you think of sanctity, or you think of all these holy words that it's kind of associated with, and that can give you a very full picture of Tulsi.
Hey, Stephen, just a quick time check. We have about 6 or 7 minutes before we should move on to Q&A.
Got it. Okay, cool. So
Thank you.
let's do calendula. Calendula is one of the best skin herbs. Really helpful for eczema, scars, wounds, warts. It's astringent, which means it helps tighten and tone your tissues. Antibacterial, which means that it can kill any bacteria or any microbes inside the system or on the skin. And it's also antifungal, so used for ringworm, used for athlete's foot, jock itch. It's fantastic for any stomach ailments like ulcers, gastritis, poor digestion. Produces these really lovely orange blossoms. Again, this is a picture of a calendula that I grew. I only had 4 to 6 hours of sun. Calendula really loves sun, so I could only get about 6 or 7 blooms throughout the whole season. But given the proper sun, it just blooms. It blooms ridiculous. It's one of my favorite flowers as an herb. Typically, it's used externally. releases its medicine really well in oils and salves. You might have used some calendula infused oils or salves or lip balms in your own life, and that's the reason why, because of its excellent ability to heal and cure skin ailments. If you're planting this in your garden, it reseeds itself very easily. So if you want it to grow wild, you typically don't have to do anything. It is a perennial, but it's sometimes treated as an annual. I used it as an annual because it was probably going to be too cold over the winter time in our zone to regrow it. And it also attracts bees and butterflies and ladybugs. Love its pollen and its nectar. And it's also delicious as well. Um, I would steep calendula. That's one of the flowers you would want to steep for about 30 minutes. I wouldn't go any longer than 30 minutes for calendula, but a good 30-minute steep for calendula would be good. Sage is one of my favorite. A lot of you are also probably familiar with sage, using it in cooking, using it in maybe different products. Been regarded as sacred throughout the ages. Antiseptic and astringent, we mentioned those earlier. Antiseptic is essentially antibacterial. Astringent is tightening and toning the tissue, and it has an affinity for your mouth and throat. As you're studying herbs, you'll notice that a lot of herbs have different affinities. So some may have an affinity for your head, some may have an affinity for your chest. Sage is one that has an affinity for your mouth and throat. So if you are suffering from any sore throats, any tooth issues, whether it's pain or gingivitis, you can use sage or sage powder to help put coat your gums and help reduce any pain and inflammation from gingivitis. I use it for sore throats. It's one of the more popular herbs for sore throats, and extremely effective. A couple years ago, I had a sore throat, and I did a sage infusion and did a gargle with it, and just gargled it probably about 3 times, probably 3 times gargle 5 times per day. And by the end of the day, I didn't have a sore throat anymore. So it's a really, really powerful herb as a gargle, as a tea, or as an infusion. It also, in your garden, it repels moths, which is always helpful, and attracts honeybees. Um, and it's delicious. Goldenrod is another one of my favorites. Goldenrod is a very late summer, early fall herb. Um, its genus name Solidago comes from solido, which means to make whole and strengthen. And this herb is a whole kind of pharmacopoeia in itself. It's anti-inflammatory, which helps reduce inflammation. Anti-catarrhal, which is helping to reduce mucus in the body, and carminative, which means it's helpful for dispelling gas. So if you have any gas or if you have uncomfortable gas in your stomach, goldenrod is really helpful for that. It helps remove gravel from the kidneys and can clean the urinary tract, including helpful for removing kidney stones. It lessens allergic reactions and symptoms to allergies. That's one of my favorite uses for it, is for allergies. Taking it about 4 to 6 weeks before a hay fever season can help lessen allergic reactions. So that's definitely something. If you have allergies and you have stuffy throat or itchy eyes, or you're sneezing a lot during allergy season, you want to have goldenrod in hand. It blooms late summer, so you probably won't see it until like July or August in New York. And it's a great late season source of food for bees and many butterflies. After a lot of flowers have already died down, or they're kind of getting ready for the fall, goldenrod comes up and provides that really last minute source of food for your bees and butterflies as we go into the fall. And it's also delicious. And finally, we have basil. So basil, again, common spice, common herb. It comes from the species name comes from the word basilicon. I thought it was interesting that basilicon was used as a royal ointment. Basilicon essentially means royal ointment, and it was used as a oil to anoint kings, and it was also used as an oil for women to apply to themselves to attract men. So it's a very popular herb in its time. It smells delicious, which is why women would probably use it in order to attract men. I know that my fiance made a pesto with some basil that I grew, and it definitely made me more attracted to her, so more than I already was. So it definitely works. Um, and it's really good for the leaves itself without even putting it in a tea, are really good to rub on your skin directly. If you have any mosquito bites or any bug bites, it almost immediately soothes the skin of any irritation, of any bites or rashes or anything on the skin when you apply the leaf directly to the skin. The infusion can soothe your nerves and relieve depression with its uplifting smell and delicious taste. And it has tiny white or purple flowers that attract honeybees. And if any of you have grown basil, you know that it loves rich soil, it loves full sun. It's extremely frost sensitive. So if it gets anywhere in the 60s or even in the high 50s, basil will probably start dying down because it just really loves the heat and the sun. So it's a prime summer herb, in my opinion. And also, it's delicious. Cool. So that's our 5 herbs that we've talked about. We're at 4:50, so we got a few more minutes. I did want to mention a couple of other ways that you can use infusions and decoctions. Kind of how I mentioned earlier, you can make your infusion or your decoction and use it as a base for other different things. So you can use infusions for a bath. What you'd want to do is maybe make a quart infusion in this jar like you would regularly, strain it out after it's been sitting for about 8 hours, and run your hot water in the bath. And then the last step of the bath, just pour your tea into the bath and relax. You're pretty much just steeping in the tea. You're the tea at that point. And the same benefits. Your skin is your biggest organ. So if you're taking a bath, you're absorbing all of the medicinal benefits of that infusion directly into your skin. So it's a really good way to get the medicine into your body. You can use foot baths, you can use body baths, and you can also use sitz baths for any type of like hemorrhoids or anything of that nature. You can use infusions and decoctions and steams, whether that's a facial steam and putting a towel over your head while you're standing over the pot of the infusion you made, letting it cool and letting the steam go into your pores and into your nasal passage. And rosemary makes a really good steam. Calendula makes a fantastic steam. Basil also makes a great steam. Rinses, you can use an herb called eyebright if you have any eye inflammation or any like styes, and you can just wash your eye in that infusion. Obviously cooled, you don't want to put hot water in your eye, and it can help remove those irritants. There's also syrups that we talked about earlier. You can use your infusions in the base for a soup, for a smoothie, and they are also delicious as well. Yeah, you can really get creative with how you use your infusions and add an extra boost of health benefits to whatever you're making, whether it's a soup, whether it's a syrup, or whether it's a smoothie. You can really use infusions in a very, very wide range of ways. And I don't think I have anything else, so that's it for me. Does anybody have any questions? I did want to mention that um, if you do have any, personalized questions, or if you're interested in any one-on-one consultations or any personalized herbal protocols or just tips and advice, feel free to send me an email at hello@medicineman.health. I'll get back to you with any questions that you have, and we can kind of take it from there. But yeah, if there's any questions that we can answer now or via the chat, I'm more than happy to answer.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This was so much information packed into
An hour.
Really sweet 1 hour. I really appreciate you taking the time to teach us today. We had a few questions about infusions. One, is there a shelf life for infusions?
Yeah, good question. So shelf life for infusions, typically when I make an infusion again in this size, what I want to do is use I usually want to drink it within 3 days. 2 days, I would say no longer. If you're making sure you're putting it in the refrigerator, I would say no longer than 5 days to have it in the fridge. But again, with teas and just in infusions and herbalism in general, you want to always use your eyes, use your nose, use your senses to make sure that you're smelling and feeling things to see if it smells a little bit off, if it looks like there's bubbles forming on top, if it smells sour. You want to use your senses to make sure. But typically with infusions, you have about 2 to 5 days to drink them.
Great, thank you. In the PDF of resources that you're going to send out next week, does that include like links to websites or where to find out more about which infusion or decoction to make?
I could include some resources I use for you to do your own research for sure. But there's so many ailments, and herbs each do like 100 different things. So if you're looking for something more specific, I would send me a direct email. But yeah, I'll include some resources where you can do a little bit more further research on how to find the right herb for you for sure.
Great, thank you. Can you make the infusion in the pot that you boil the water in?
Can you make the infusion in the pot that you boil the water in? Yes, you can, absolutely. If you boiled the water in that pot, you would just add your 1 cup of herb into that pot and then cover the pot so that the way no steam is escaping. But make sure you turn the heat off so that it's not still boiling. And then you can let it sit in that pot for 4 to 8 hours, the same way you would let it sit in a jar, and then strain it out if you like after the end. So very similar, you can, but just make sure you add the pot cover on top.
Great, thank you. Can these be grown indoors in containers or only outdoors?
Yeah, they can be grown indoors in containers. So I grew like I really don't have much gardening space at all. So I grew started most of my herbs indoors with using like a grow light system. It was taking up essentially half of my living room. And then I moved it into like a small container garden outside. So if you have proper sunlight, maybe like a good south facing window, and you have, 6 to 8 hours of sun, then you can definitely grow them in indoors. I would definitely want to use like maybe a calendula and a basil, maybe a calendula outdoors. I mean, if I think the thing is going to be the sun and the soil. As long as you have access to good quality soil and good quality sun, I think you can grow most of these indoors for sure. But grow lights always help if you don't have access to sun.
Yeah, my understanding is most of these herbs are Mediterranean and need a lot of sun. So if you don't have a lot of sun, you would need supplemental light. And for
Right.
anything that you want the flower, like calendula, like Stephen was saying, needs to be in the sun or it's not going to make flowers.
Mhm.
What about lemon balm? We have a lot of that in our garden, someone says.
Oh, nice. I actually grew lemon balm. I was considering including it on the slide. So I grew a really really beautiful lemon balm plant. One of my favorite plants. It works. It's antiviral. It's antidepressive, anti-inflammatory. It blends extremely well with holy basil. So if you have a Tulsi infusion and you want to add lemon balm, it grows really really well. It's also in the mint family, so it's really helpful for any stomach woes or any digestion. And it makes a fantastic tea. You can mix like lemon balm and oat seed and really all of the lemony herbs like lemon balm, lemon verbena, and lemongrass, and that makes a really fabulous like 3 lemon citrusy kind of tea. If you want to add some orange peel in there, you can. But yeah, lemon balm is one of my favorites. Definitely can be included. It's a really good pollinator. I can't remember the color of the flower off the top of my head, but I do know that some bees were buzzing around it in my garden. So yeah, excellent pollinator plant for sure.
Great. Thank you.
White flowers. Thank you.
Is it better to use fresh herbs or dried herbs, or does it depend on the herb? How would you make that decision?
Yeah, good question. So the general thought is that dried herbs are stronger because the when the water gets released from the fresh herbs, the constituents are a lot more concentrated inside the leaf. So when you're adding water to rehydrate it, it's going to be released a lot quicker and a lot stronger. However, it does depend on the plant in some instances. So it's really depending on the plant. I prefer to use dried herbs for infusions, and I try to use fresh herbs or recently harvested herbs for tinctures, which is like an alcohol-based extraction. But typically, it's a lot easier to measure using dried herbs because they take up less room and they're a little bit more potent, according to most herbal whoever you talk to herbally.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Will you please type your email address into the chat so that folks can have it
Yes.
there?
Okay, should be.
Meanwhile, thank you, Chantal, for reminding us that lemon balm really loves to take over. It certainly does. It self-sows and will take over. So be careful where you plant it. And I will add to that, be careful where you harvest it from as well, especially in New York City community gardens, backyards, because the soil in New York City tends to have heavy metals in it. So any herbs that you're growing for medicinal purposes should be grown in clean soil. And then I think we have time for one more question. So the last question was just about the basil. Do you use the leaves or the blossoms or both?
You can use both. You can use the leaves, fresh or dried, in teas. I think the blossoms are nice. They're not traditionally not. You can use them in your tea. They smell really really good. I think you can actually probably get a better use from the flowers in like a salad. They make excellent toppers for a salad or something like that, and add a nice highlight.
Or just on eggs.
Or on eggs, and they add like a nice light, not a full basil flavor, but like a basil junior kind of flavor, a light basil. But yeah, you can use the flowers, you can use the leaves, and you can even try experiment, make an infusion with the flower and see how you like it. You might like the flowers more than you like the leaves.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Stephen.
Yeah,
this was
thank you guys.
super amazing.
If you have any questions, send me an email. My email is in the chat, and I'd be happy to talk to you guys. Thank you guys so much for having me.